What separates a good anime from a great anime? Why do some animes stick with us long after we've watched it? Welcome to The Workshop.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Kris.
We're two friends from high school and now aspiring writers. And in this podcast, we discuss and deconstruct storytelling elements in some of our favorite animes.
Today in The Workshop, we will be talking about the highly acclaimed Season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Based on the manga by Gege Akutami and with stunning animation brought to life by Studio Mappa, Jujutsu Kaisen is an urban fantasy brimming with style, heart, and comedy, and is a fresh new addition to the frontrunners of shounen anime.
So Jujutsu Kaisen is set in a world of cursed spirits that are born from the hatred and fear of humans towards the world and also towards other people. These spirits are exorcised by curse users, who are humans, who can perceive and channel cursed energy in various ways. After making his grandfather one last promise to do good and to save others, Yuji swallows a special grade cursed object that curses him and is propelled into the thrilling world of cursed spirits and sorcerers.
Ooh, spooky.
So this is just a warning that there will be spoilers. We will be spoiling essentially the entirety of the first season, the 24 episodes. So if you haven't watched Jujutsu Kaisen yet, oh my goodness, go watch it, please.
Go watch it right now.
Our overall impressions will hopefully be mostly spoiler free. So first of all, I'd like to say that this show just has it all. Like, it has all of the hype and the elements that make shonen anime so cool, so visually engaging. And also beyond that, like, it's also just really funny. I think that I really have a soft spot for shows that can make you fall in love with the characters. It tries to explore really, really dark and grim themes. One of the main themes that it does talk a lot about is death. And what does it mean to die a proper death, right? Obviously, there are a lot of questions that surround that, and it is a question that our protagonist even has to face multiple times throughout the show. Every step of the way, he learns something new, and he's able to reevaluate what his answer to that question is. And in terms of the writing, I thought that this show was very self-aware in two ways. Mm-hmm. So the first way, I think that it's very aware of its genre and the responsibilities that come with being a shonen show. Yeah, and what I mean by that is everything feels paced very well in terms of like our protagonist's learning curve. It always feels like they're using things that happened to them in the past, their previous experiences, to build upon their, I guess, arsenal of tools, and the way it affects the way in which they interact with other villains, other people in the future. And then also, there are a few tropes that I feel like the show is also aware of that they very like cleverly kind of address. So there's occasionally, there's a number of times throughout the show where Yuji is like so blunt and he almost like breaks the fourth wall and questions like, oh, like, why is this time skip happening? Like, why is this happening? In a very like comedic way. It's able to like make light of elements that might make typical shonen a little bit, you know, like cookie cutter, I guess.
Yeah.
And also, I guess the last thing that I just really, really love about this show are the battle sequences. There's so many moving parts in every single battle that it's honestly borderline convoluted. Like, for some battles, I was literally like, what's going on? Like, there's always a lot of moving parts, but I feel like it never really gets out of hand. In fact, I think it strikes a really good balance between being understandable, but also being complicated enough that it's still genuinely interesting. The fights of this show just have it all. They have the visuals, they have the intellect. I really, really love when battles are like well thought out. They have character growth. You know, we always talk about how battles have to do something for our characters, our main characters, if they're involved. They have to do something for them emotionally, or they have to at least help them, you know, grow in some type of way. And there was never a battle where I came out of it feeling like it was aimless. Plus the fact that it was like a lot of the battles were unpredictable and genuinely surprising. I think that, like, frankly, that's one of the most important elements of a shonen battle anime. You know, I went in with an analytical eye, and I felt like the beginning of the show was paced really well, but I was kind of wondering where they were going to go with it. And but by the end of the season, I was just I was floored. Like, I was just so happy.
I felt the same way. When I watched it for the first time, the first half of the season, I was like, okay, it's a shonen. And then by the back half, I was like, this show is doing something different. Not only do I think it is very well written and fast paced, I also think that it's establishing itself very well as just as like the part of this new generation of shonen battle anime. I think a lot of that has to do with its style, characterization, and comedy, and just its overall vibe. Like, this show has a vibe, and it's very strong. If you listen to our last episode, you will know that Bleach, which is written by Tite Kubo, was one of my all-time favorite animes ever. So it came as no surprise to me when I found out that Akutami, who writes Jujutsu Kaisen, was also very inspired by Kubo and Bleach, because this show really feels like Bleach for the new generation. There's a lot of overlap in the aesthetic, even in the music, and especially with it being an urban fantasy. I want to touch upon urban fantasy as a genre because I've mentioned before that one thing I really like from urban fantasy is when the story feels truly grounded in the real world. Right. So what I mean by that is I like when everything about the world building and the characterizations feels contemporary. Even the style of humor, it's kind of silly and deadpan. It's a little bit slapstick as well, but I feel like the humor is very smart and attuned to this generation style of humor. Yeah. The show has a really strong personality. And on top of that, I love the episodes where the characters are like investigating a supernatural mystery. Yes. I'm like a big fan of that trope. I love the animation. Every fight was very expensive looking, very cinematic, especially the latter half of the show. Like, every fight just got better and better. I love that the show doesn't hold back on darker themes. I know you touched upon this as well, but I think the way that this show explores darker themes is very different from other shonen anime. It explores things like death and morality in a lot more of a nuanced way than I've seen in any shonen. With Jujutsu Kaisen, whenever there are like darker themes or moments, the show feels a lot more meditative. It kind of forces characters and the audience to linger in those unsettling feelings without any sort of resolution, really. And there's a lot less of that overbearing preachiness that you see in a lot of other shonen anime. I mean, that kind of stuff I think has a time and place, but I think it fits the vibe of this show to not do that as much. It's pretty good at showing versus telling when it comes to emotion. And I also want to talk about shonen tropes and subversion. I'm really impressed with how well Akutami exhibits his knowledge of this genre. I use the exact same phrasing in my notes. I said the show is very, very self-aware. It's littered with these pop culture references to other shonen anime, to real life Hollywood celebrities. It creates this feeling that the characters are real teenagers. And I think it's so impressive how polished and fine-tuned the tropes feel, but they are also subverted in really genuinely unique ways. And I'll talk about it more when I talk about the writing. I think the world building is really intriguing. You get a glimpse of this bigger Jujutsu sorcerer world. You get a taste of a really interesting political squabble between the old-timey traditional sorcerers and this new generation of sorcerers. And I think a big reason this season excels is that it gives you a hint of intrigue. It hints at all of these characters that we hear about but haven't met yet, which creates this sense that we're only seeing the tiniest sliver of this plot. And I really like that the season spends most of its time just fleshing out the main cast and who they are and endearing you to them. I think that's a very effective way to handle a first season. So I'm really looking forward to season 2. I'm looking forward to exploring more of the power structures of the world and more of the villain motivations. But overall, I was so in love. I was so enamored by this entire season, this entire show.
Okay. So that was our first impressions. Let's dive right in to the exposition, episodes 1 to 3.
We see Yuji tied up in this mysterious room, and he's talking to this man who introduces himself as Gojo. And immediately we learn who he is. He's a teacher, so he's the sensei character. And then right before it cuts to the opening credits, and right before we flash back to how Yuji got there, Gojo is telling our main character that he's about to be executed. Very intriguing, lots of questions. I like that this show immediately starts with this like this shock factor thing. And I thought at first that the show was going to just like use that just for like an opening hook, but that is actually something that carries on as a point of tension for the rest of the show, which we'll get to when we talk about future episodes.
The way that the first episode is written tells you a lot about the writer, because it tells you, because the first scene isn't always necessarily the first thing that the writer writes, but I feel like a lot of care is always put into the ending and also the beginning.
Definitely, yeah.
So I think that the placement of that cold open was very intentional, to create suspense. Mm-hmm. But also the opening scene of Yuji calling the hospital to check in on his grandfather, like you can just tell that the first episode was very carefully crafted in terms of pacing and in terms of what the writer wants the audience to know about his characters. I want to talk about the hospital scene because I think that just from the first 2 minutes, we're able to gather so much about Yuji and his relationship with his grandfather. So, we can assume that he cares a lot about his grandfather, or he has at least some stake in his well-being. And then, to our surprise, his grandfather is like this like super rough guy who's really like prone to anger. He yells at his grandson a little bit. But that tells us that, they have a complicated relationship. And I just thought it was so interesting that they portray Yuji as this character that is a little bit more serious in the beginning, like a little bit more somber, because he, from the cold open and from this scene, you don't really see his like, laid back and silly personality just yet. We're actually introduced to him first as a pretty serious guy. Yuji interacting with Gojo and Yuji interacting with his grandfather, and we're already able to learn like so much about our main protagonist just from the first few minutes. Like, I was really, really impressed by the beginning.
The scenes that he chooses to focus on is very well curated. The scene where his grandfather dies, first of all, whenever you see a sick grandparent in any show, immediately you kind of like, it gets me like really tense because I always know like, okay, this character's probably gonna die.
Yeah.
And I'm just waiting for it to happen. But this show almost feels like it knows that. And the grandfather passes away pretty much within the first 10 minutes of the episode or something like that. Mm-hmm. And when I first watched that scene and his grandfather has the speech about, spend your life saving others, help as many people as you can, so you don't die like me, you don't die alone, you die a proper death, whatever. At first I was like very on the nose and a little bit contrived, but when I went back and watched this episode for the second time, having watched the rest of the season, it hit a little bit different because the idea of what death means to Yuji is a reoccurring motif for the rest of the season. And the way that Yuji keeps remembering this moment with his grandfather comes back in different ways. It comes back multiple times, but as he continually reflects on it, he reflects on it in more and more substantive ways. Even when his grandfather dies, like it's a very quiet scene. It doesn't feel melodramatic at all. And the show doesn't even dwell on it because as soon as he passes away, it cuts to Fushiguro showing up and telling Yuji, like, sorry you're mourning, but I need something from you. It just keeps going. Like, the show is or the episode is, like, very fast-paced. The ball is always rolling.
I think it was an intentional choice to start our protagonist off as a boy who's kind of just blindly following his grandfather's last will and words. And then later on, that dedication is questioned and acknowledged by the teachers around him, by himself, through the experiences that he has to have. Yeah, it took away from the viewing experience at first, like when you first watch it. But in hindsight, you realize that there is very much a process of refining Yuji's motivations and Yuji's characterization and everything. And that was kind of his starting point, you know? So I agree.
I want to appreciate a couple scenes that happen when this special grade curse gets unleashed at the school. Yuji, when he comes in and like comes through the window to join the fight and he just like punches the curse in the face, I was like, why is he such a jock? He's such a dumb jock. No thoughts, head empty.
Yeah.
I want to also talk about Gojo's character introduction. I know technically he was in the cold open, but this is his actual character introduction. This is when Yuji first meets him. I think it is chaotic as hell that Gojo shows up to find his student, Fushiguro, on the verge of death. And he strolls up and he was like, I'm checking in on you on a whim just because I have time. And we learn that he's the worst teacher ever. He was just off souvenir shopping while his student was like hunting Sukuna's finger.
Like, he's established to be essentially the most powerful sorcerer as of right now in the world of sorcery. But this guy like isn't here for half the season. And do you know why?
A lot of questions.
It's because everyone's always like, oh yeah, he's just off on a business trip. Or he's like on vacation. And it's like, literally all your problems could be solved if Gojo was there. But they just like, you know, he's such a force to be reckoned with that for narrative purposes, he can't always be there or else things would just be too easy.
So, okay, here's what I find really interesting. The idea that the systems of power in this world are dictating that Yuji, our main character, is only being kept around to eventually die is an interesting point of tension to set up literally in your first couple episodes. And it almost casts this shadow over the entire story. And I can't wait to see how it plays out. I really like the line that Gojo says when he's telling Yuji the situation of like, you have two options. Either you can die now or you can swallow more fingers and die later.
I just think it's so like Yuji to not even have that be like a motivating factor. Like if you watch him throughout the entire season, not once is it revealed that his motivation is a desire to stay alive because he doesn't want to die from this like by execution. He never puts too much thought on this decision that's been presented before him.
Exactly.
And I think it does kind of speak to his like good-naturedness, his kind-heartedness, because he is kind of that sacrificial savior type protagonist that is quite common in shonen genres. But yeah, I had the exact same note in my notes. Like, I think this is such a highly interesting point of conflict that the whole show is going to be essentially grounded upon. I think that's something that this show does a lot. Like, it sets up a lot of terrible circumstances that could potentially happen down the line, so that you start now developing a sense of like dread for the next few seasons, you know?
Okay, episode 3, we meet best girl Nobara.
Okay,
so,
best girl, but also she scares the hell out of me. Like,
that's why she's best girl. I think Nobara really rounds out this main cast. First of all, she shows up. She's from the countryside. She shows up to Tokyo and she takes one look at the boys and she's like making all these snap judgments about them. And the dynamic of the team is so well established in this episode. You really get the sense that she is like the final piece of the puzzle in this cast. She is the abrasive, almost narcissistic type. And then you have Yuji, who's the outgoing ball of sunshine. Fushiguro is like the reserved tsundere. And then Gojo is your OP troublemaker, you know, who acts dumber than he is.
Those
probably
are like really good descriptions.
Yeah. And you know, when you first have a female character show up, you're like, okay, so she's the token female character. But I feel like in this episode, she slots in so well with the rest of the main cast. Like, I was living for her. I love her.
Yeah. I felt like when she was first introduced, and she, you know, she, as we said, she's on the same wavelength as Yuji a lot of the time. So we get so many like comedic moments of the two, along with Gojo, like just acting crazy,
sharing the same brain cells.
And so I feel like there could have been a little bit danger there with making the two of them, Yuji and Nobara, too similar, which is why I appreciated that they conveniently had an episode with just the two of them going in to this haunted building alone. And showing the audience the difference at their core between these two characters.
Exactly.
And for me, you could have a different opinion, but for me, I think that difference is the way that they think about, just like the way that they think and solve problems under pressure, because Yuji thinks with his heart a lot and his intuition and his guts, but Nobara is more logical. She thinks with her brain and she tries to come out with the best outcome. So in this episode, when they're faced with the hostage situation where it's obviously somebody else's life on the line, you can see like Nobara going through the possibilities. She's like, okay, well, you know, it'd be better if I came out of this alive instead of the both of us dead.
Exactly.
Whereas Yuji just kind of smacks through the wall and
dumb jock.
He's a dumb jock. We kind of get the first taste of their differences, but how they're compatible with each other in combat.
Yeah. I really like what Gojo says, because Gojo and Fushiguro stay outside and they're just chatting, and I like how Gojo tells Fushiguro today is more of a test to see how crazy Nobara is, and he uses that phrasing to see how crazy she is. I think it's a really interesting idea that to be a Jujutsu sorcerer, you channel your negative emotions, right?
Same thing.
So presumably someone who has a lot of negative emotions can draw from a lot of power, and Gojo explains that there's some degree of insanity that is required to be a powerful Jujutsu sorcerer. Even if you're talented, it's not an easy job. So you have to be quite resilient and a little bit crazy to be able to do it. And I like that idea because, first of all, it's just an interesting world building idea, but also it's kind of like a good narrative device to make your characters quirky, you know, like to make your characters kind of weird. I just thought it was like an interesting detail.
So that wraps up our exposition. We'll go on to the next arc.
This episode goes into moral dilemmas, one of many, where Fushiguro and Yuji are talking about this idea of who is quote unquote worth saving. Yuji finds this dead body of one of the inmates, and he wants to bring the dead body back to his mother, who is waiting outside. And Fushiguro tells him that it's not worth risking your life for someone who's done terrible things. He's really challenging Yuji's idea or ideology of trying to save everyone. And I really like the progression of just the pacing in this episode, because as the tension of their argument is building, what you see is Nobara gets sucked into the floor.
The void.
The special grade shows up, and the first thing we see is Yuji's hand immediately getting sliced off. It was just a really good, it was really good tension. Like, you really got the sense that these guys are gonna die, and Yuji does die. The scene where he is evaluating what to do and comes to the conclusion that he needs to use Sukuna to get out of this, but he can't do that while Nobara and Fushiguro are around because it's too dangerous. And I just really liked that moment. It was not overwritten, it wasn't melodramatic, it just happens, and you immediately understand that Fushiguro is recognizing that Yuji is begging him without Yuji having to beg him. I also like that Yuji has to face the consequences for not having a training arc yet.
Yeah.
He's getting absolutely demolished, and he's really just buying time for Fushiguro and Nobara to get out. I think it was really powerful, the moment where Yuji, his body is basically getting absolutely ripped apart. And he shows a lot of fear and regret. There's still a real moment of him saying, if only I hadn't swallowed that finger, you know. He says, I want to run, I don't want to die. And I mean, that does lead him to, I guess, because the buildup of negative emotions, he's able to bring out his cursed energy for the first time. But I thought it was a really powerful moment to really see your shonen protagonist break down and regret his choices.
I do want to talk a little bit about Sukuna and Yuji's relationship, I guess. Well, Sukuna is essentially possessing Yuji, and that's not an uncommon thing to do in shonen anime. And so when Yuji shifts into becoming Sukuna and having Sukuna take over his body, I just think that the animation is crazy for this, because Yuji's body physically looks bigger. I know there are the physical differences, like the tattoos, and also I guess the lack of injuries or whatever. But you do have to portray this character as being the same height, the same person, the same body, the same build, but have all of those changes come through attitude and confidence and conduct. I think that's pretty crazy. It's kind of scary. He
is kind of scary.
Yeah. I really thought that was crazy for the animators to do that.
Just to go back to the whole idea of why were these first years investigating a case that was way, way, way out of their league, I really like the reasoning that Akutami gives us. We learn that the higher ups sent the first years to deal with this special grade curse on purpose because Gojo was out of town, knowing that they would probably die. I like this because it exposes the bureaucratic politics of the Jujutsu world. The higher ups were making these movements to tactfully kill Yuji because they are at odds with Gojo. Very nice world building detail there. When Gojo sort of talks about his dream of revolutionizing the Jujutsu world by raising a new generation of sorcerers, I am really excited to see more of that clash of Gojo's view of the world versus the conservatism of the existing powers that he's trying to bring down. That's what I love to see from a shonen, in the sense that, you know, the world and the danger is much bigger than we can even see right now. I think that's just really cool. The fight scene between Jogo and Gojo in the next episode.
That.
So
Jogo and Gojo.
Yeah.
I hate saying that. Yeah.
But that is what we get in episode 7. Where my freaking head. Jogo, the volcano one, he decides to meathead jock it up, and he's like, I'm just gonna kill Gojo right now. We know how strong Jogo is, presumably, but we haven't seen how strong Gojo is.
Okay, I want to talk about how powerful this show makes Gojo out to be. I think that it was so deliberate that while Yuji was dead, Gojo says this line where he basically implies that he sees potential in certain sorcerers of this world to one day attain the same level of power as him, and he includes Yuji in that list. So I think it's crazy that we have this image now of what Yuji could become, right? Because we just see how amazing Gojo is. Because we know what Yuji is like now, and now we know where he's gonna end up, or where he has the potential, what he has the potential to become. It's like we have all of this like learning to do and building to do, and it just like raises our expectations for what's to come, you know, in his character development.
I agree. And I think it's one thing for the writer to say, this guy is OP. Like, it's to the point where the villains literally cannot carry out their plan until Gojo's dead.
And they don't even try. Like,
yeah, and they're like, yeah, we're not even going to go there. Really, this episode just serves to be like a little bit of a training arc for Yuji, but also just to raise a good amount of questions about the lore and about Gojo's power. And I hope the show delves into it later.
Also,
Limitless
Domain is...
why is he like this?
Like, it's so visually, like, crazy
stunning.
Stimulating.
Yeah. I know,
just
oh my
the
gosh.
idea that you can't even touch the guy because there is an infinity between you and him. Like, that's how unattainable he is. Like, what is the most powerful shonen protag or villain that you can think of right now? And can they match up against Gojo?
I keep seeing these threads on Twitter of like, who would win, this character or this character? Too. And I saw, like, every time I see anything versus Gojo, I'm like, what? Like, I don't know. I saw like Levi Ackerman versus Gojo. No. I was like, I'm sorry,
Attack on Titan is like a masterpiece in and of itself. But the AUs just don't match up, you know?
The AUs don't work. I was like, 3D maneuver gear would not work in a Limitless Domain.
It wouldn't.
Okay? It's like almost comical how OP they make him. Like, it's like, it's crazy. Oh, I wanted to talk about the villains, because this episode ends with a scene with the villains. We meet the final party member of the main villain squad, Mahito, who is a fairly young curse. And we learn a new part of their plan, which is to kill Gojo when the time is right. And that is planned for October 31st in Shibuya. I want to talk about why I love this in the context of urban fantasy. Because first of all, this show has such Halloween-y vibes. And the audacity of Akutami to be like, October 31st.
The audacity.
And using the setting of Shibuya, which is like famous, well known for its for being this like wild Halloween street party.
True.
That's just really cool to me, and it's really smart of the mangaka to make use of real world culture like that. It just goes back to like what I was saying about the show feeling really contemporary. Like, imagine a fight taking place, like a big fantastical fight taking place, but like Halloween, like in Shibuya.
What?
Why is he
like
so
the
cool?
OP riddled with like contemporary places in Japan too?
Exactly.
So it's like it knows exactly its audience.
I love it so much. I'm obsessed. I'm a fan. Akutami.
Okay, let's move on to my favorite arc.
Ooh, yeah,
my
episodes 9 to 13.
Is the Junpei arc.
It makes sense why Mahito, being the curse that represents human hatred, is thematically parallel to Junpei's character as a kid who's bullied, you know, and channeling that hatred in a very powerful way. That is kind of our thematic setup for this arc. But before we go into all of that, I want to talk about Nanami. And because he is another sorcerer that we meet at the start of this arc. And I really like his character.
Yeah.
So Nanami says, I studied at Jujutsu High and learned sorcerers are shit. So I went to work at a company and I learned work is also shit. So if both are equally shit, I'll take the one I'm more suited to. He is... Okay, what's really interesting about Nanami is that he is just a regular guy.
Yeah, literally.
So the way he's crafted is done in such a way that he literally represents the 9-to-5 salaryman. But his job is that he exorcises demons instead
Yeah.
of working in an office. And I just really like that he's really quirky, but he also just like he represents like someone in the real world, like literally just like a businessman. And I really like that archetype of a character, especially in an urban fantasy.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that quirkiness to him has such a great impact here because it really juxtaposes the 9 to 5 business day with the crazy world of sorcery. It's like,
Yeah,
how can you
it's
get
funny.
those two worlds to be consistent with each other? And as we said earlier, you do have to be a little bit crazy to be in this job. And I think Nanami is that way, but under the guise of, you know, a normal civilian 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Okay, I hate the way that Junpei and Yuji get along so well. And it's like when you make two characters get along so well,
Yeah.
something bad definitely
Something's-
gonna happen.
something's up.
I knew something bad was gonna happen. And yet, I was still shocked when the bad thing happened. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. They have this conversation essentially about their contrasting ideologies. Basically, Junpei, who's lived a life full of fear and hatred towards his bullies, towards the bystanders that have seen him get bullied and hurt. He's really reaching for some kind of justification that would justify revenge on his enemies. But that
Yeah.
is in such contrast to Yuji's ideology, which is, as we said, this universal desire to save everybody. And you get the sense that Junpei is also a very, very malleable character in that
Yeah.
when he gets influenced really easily. When he when he interacts with Mahito, he really absorbs a lot of what the villains say to him, and it's almost like the villains know that, so it's even a more sinister way of manipulating his emotions, and you can see that in the way that Mahito tells him, this will save you, like this justification will better your life, and he believes it. But then when you see him with Yuji, and Yuji obviously being a character that we know has a great influence on people around him, when you see like these two interact, you almost have this sense of like, please, like sway him over to the good side, like save this character because he could be saved. Like he's on the brink right now, you know? And the reason why I say the post-dinner scene is so well like built up to and constructed is because like it seems very believable. You know that Junpei has a lot of questions on his mind. I think that those moments really endear you to a character like Junpei because you can see how he struggles and see how he's influenced.
I think that Yuji, like, meeting someone his age, someone a lot like him, but who has a very different view of morality and killing. Like, I think Junpei asks Yuji something about, like, oh, as a Jujutsu sorcerer, like, have you ever killed anyone? Would you ever kill anyone? And I think there's this, like, really stark contrast between cynicism versus optimism or positivity. And in the conversation, you see the flaws in both outlooks because you do see that, like, you know, both of them are making points. Both of them have come from different experiences and are fundamentally, like, at their core, like, they've been shaped by those experiences in such different ways. But you also see just Junpei, like, slowly getting influenced by Yuji's outlook almost. But when his mom is murdered, it's a turning point that Junpei can't come back from. But it almost makes you ask, like, what if? Like, what if Junpei met Yuji earlier? What if his mom didn't die? Like, if he didn't have... Because the thing about Junpei's character is that he is there's a series of things that have pushed him and pushed him and pushed him. The villains come in and just... They give him that final push off the deep end. So it's not like Junpei is someone who just, like, immediately he just, like, turns on his bullies just like that. It's like you get the sense that it's the final domino that has been toppled over, which is what makes his character feel really tragic. Are you ready to talk about like when he dies.
Yeah, so when he dies, sorry, I'm not, you go first.
Okay. So there's a running joke in the anime community that shonen protagonists can change people and villains through the power of words and friendship. And I think that's another trope of many that this show chooses to subvert in the most visceral way with Junpei by showing that Yuji can try really hard to do that and still fail. So firstly, Junpei's character is teased in the opening every single episode. He is explicitly shown as being part of the cast in the opening, wearing the Jujutsu High uniform, hanging out with the rest of the squad, leading us to believe that when we finally meet his character, we think we're being introduced to a new cast member because of how we are wired as anime viewers, as shonen viewers. And Akutami knows that. We think that he is eventually going to be a student that will join the school. And instead, we see that the power of friendship is not enough. And Junpei gets lured in by Mahito. And in the end, Junpei not only suffers, but he ends up being used like a tool in this like grander plan, and Yuji is forced to watch him die in this very brutal way. And so, to be honest, like as sad as this arc was, I was pleasantly surprised by Akutami's audacity to lean into this trope, like fully just go into it and then pull the rug up from under you. I was impressed. But I was also like...
I was like traumatized.
I was traumatized,
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the reason why this death is so traumatizing is because you are set up to believe that Junpei is going to be an integral character. Like, I think that when we talk about shonen shows or seasons, the protagonist needs that first L, you know? And you're right, we're under the expectation that he's going to join the cast. And even before he dies, there's a flash to a picture of what Yuji imagines could have been. And it's the four of them with Junpei in the uniform and everything. And you just think like, yeah, like Junpei, his personality fits too. It's like the four of them would have been a great, you know, they would have had a good dynamic. And I think the fact that Junpei was built up as a character who is, by all other accounts, innocent, but just easily influenced. And the fact that right before he dies, he like tells Yuji, don't hurt Mahito, like he's a good guy. And he realizes that he's like, he has a revelation that he's been manipulated. And that's like the moment that he dies too. Like, so I think for our protagonist, this was a very great experience for his learning curve and development. But like as a viewer, like I'm still traumatized.
As a viewer, I need therapy.
I was literally like, I can't watch this show anymore. This show is over.
And I love that they take the time to meditate on death and responsibility. I actually really like the way that this arc ends. Episode 13 ends with, we circle back to the teachers and the bullies at Junpei's school, recognizing the role that they played in ruining Junpei's life. It's a conversation between a teacher and one of the bullies, which is a nice thematic ribbon tied over the arc. And then Yuji gives this like internal monologue about the fact that in all of the ways that he has confronted death now, he's still trying to make sense of it, and he sort of resolves himself to become stronger until he can understand what it means. And I feel like this does a lot to cement death as a theme of the show. It already was, but I think especially now, we know that death is something that is on the horizon for Yuji's character, potentially. So I just appreciate the fact that the writing takes the time to explore it in a multitude of ways and to like pause and actually like linger in that feeling. And it explores it in ways that I feel like go beyond surface level.
All right. So we'll move on now to episodes 14 to 16, which is the Kyoto tournament arc.
So
this is the arc where it kind of starts off as like a training arc of sorts.
First of all, I think it's so funny that Yuji spends half this season dead.
Yeah.
And they're gonna make his surprise return a literal joke. It's pretty comedic the way they build the hype of Yuji's return. Imagining how excited everyone will be when it actually happens. And then like Gojo's like, no, we gotta make your comeback like a big deal. Like Fushiguro and Nobara are gonna be crying. And then they set up this whole thing, and then it cuts to the students and they're just like, no reaction.
No reaction.
Also, Principal Gakuganji straight up telling his students to murder Yuji again during the tournament. Like, Kyoto School is insane.
And I feel like that is a common shonen thing to do as well. Like, when you're introducing new characters from different schools and you kind of want to give those schools a little bit of impact, so you make them, like, act crazy when the characters first interact.
Another thing that I really like about this arc, and the show in general, is that there are multiple things going on. Like, it is a tournament arc, but there's also this, like, larger mystery of why curses are working together and becoming stronger and more intelligent. And then later on, there's this whole plot point of a spy being suspected at the school, and which is kind of a trope within itself. And then we have, like, the villain attack. It's just, like, I like that there are these parallel plot threads that are brewing in the background. I really like that Todo and Yuji kind of have a moment here. They sort of set up that Todo and Yuji are going to fight each other, and they kind of do, but it's mostly just a way for Todo to meet Yuji. So Todo's character is like your classic beefy jock meathead. But I really like his character. He's very much like an exaggerated caricature, often used for comedy, but I really like how Akutami like leans into that caricature. And he just gives Todo the most ridiculous scenes in the entire show. Like, the narrative device of Todo, like, entering these vignettes in his head where he envisions Yuji and like this whole entire history between them. He basically decides that he really likes Yuji and he wants to be his friend, but the way that it's like portrayed as this like short film slice of life that happens in his head is so like funny. He's like writing fanfic of Yuji in his head. I thought that was like really good comedy.
Yeah, that was so good. I also like how he's like, even though it's, you know, the writer leans into the beefy meathead kind of character. Yeah. He's like supposed to be very smart as well. And his clapping technique is not just a punchy technique. Yeah. It's a very strategic one, and he uses it to his advantage. And then they use that to like make Todo into like a mentor of sorts for Yuji. Yeah, they give Yuji like a training arc in the middle of the tournament arc, which I thought was really smart. I have a couple of things to say about the interaction between Mekamaru and Panda. I have some notes. I don't have notes.
Thoughts.
I just really like Mekamaru as a character.
Me too.
And the way that he interacts with Panda, and why specifically this matchup is so significant for him. Because we find out that Mekamaru is essentially this guy who all he wants is a normal life. He wants a normal body, and that's not something he has. It's not something that he can take advantage of. But he just wants to like hang out with his friends, you know?
Yeah.
And that is so sad. And we find out that the reason that he has such resentment for Panda is because Panda is literally a cursed puppet. And something about that just rubs Mekamaru the wrong way, because he was literally born as a person without the benefits of being a person without the freedom or autonomy of being a person. And yet this cursed puppet has everything that he's always wanted, and he's not even a real person, you know?
Yeah, I like that Mechamaru gets matched up with Panda, and I do really think Mechamaru's character is really interesting. The way that he's confined because of a certain condition that he has, I think that makes a point of highlighting the unique difficulties that a disabled person or someone with a chronic illness would face. That's not really something that I've seen a lot in anime, especially in a fantastical anime, you know, to make a member of your main cast like disabled or who has like some kind of condition.
And I think what's also really endearing about Mechamaru is that I feel like there is something about having that like mechanical exterior, but then in the gag sketches afterwards they show him as like the only guy who's actually approachable, like out of the all the Kyoto students.
That
like
was really
all the
funny.
girls are like, can you do this for me?
Yeah.
So he's like really actually cute. Like just the softest,
he's just
and
a
approachable
nice
guy. But when you see him like in his tub with like all of the tubes connected to him, and then his like way of operating is through like a machine. Yeah, you don't immediately get that sense from him. Yeah, so he's just,
it was pretty cute.
So endearing.
Yeah.
So next we have episodes 18 to 20. And this is the Hanami battle arc.
The writing keeps teasing that there's a big three in this world of like Jujutsu sorcerers, these like three clans that are kind of like the powerful sorcerers of this world. When I first watched the show, I didn't know until around this part of the show that Fushiguro actually belongs to the Zenin clan. Because it's not something that Fushiguro really talks about.
Or
acknowledges, which is very interesting. And I just think the fact that everyone around Fushiguro keeps talking about how powerful he is, the fact that he belongs to the Zenin clan, and he always just keeps hand-waving it. And we don't really get like answers for it until the end of the season.
I think that it's not just here, but the entire season long, you're right, like Shiguro has kind of been denying having conversations about his past. And so it's a build-up for something that it's probably going to be very emotional and very...
interesting.
A big reveal of some sort later on.
Yeah. So. Okay. I don't know if you remember like the shot, but this is where the animation gets absolutely bonkers insane in this arc, because there's this scene where Maki shows up to help out, and there's like a few minutes where Fushiguro and Maki are both fighting Hanami at the same time, and there's just really good fight choreography and really good sequencing
when they switch
with the weapons. It's so freaking good.
It's so cool.
And actually Maki tends to have some of my favorite choreography in this season so far. I think because she is just a weapons user, so she doesn't have all this cursed energy, all this soft magic, cursed techniques that all the other characters have. So her fight choreography is very cool because it's very simple to follow. It's just really satisfying to watch because it's just cool martial arts. So then Todo and Yuji drop in like the meatheads that they are. The first thing I want to say about this fight is just the movie level quality of production of this fight scene. Yeah. I was vibrating like the entire budget. This show is so freaking expensive. Like, every fight gets cooler and cooler and more dynamic.
Her entire motivation is that she wants to give time, I think, to like allow the earth to restore itself and to heal as a consequence of human activity. Yeah. And so I think that she's supposed to represent humanity's fear towards nature, maybe, or like the unknown of nature. And I think it's so ironic that her left arm, it's like a give and take away kind of thing. Yeah. Her left arm is just full of destructive tendencies, and she literally sucks the life out of the plants and the wildlife around her. And I think it says something about like the villains, because even though your villains have motivations that make sense on a cerebral level,
Right.
you still see that they're, at their core, the way that they operate is evil inherently. Like, they take life away and use it for their own selfish purposes.
Yeah, on the topic of villain motivations, I do feel like I hope that there's, I mean, I'm sure there is, but I hope that there is more to it than just like, we want to become the dominant species again. Because like, that's fine. Like, that makes sense. But I'm really hoping that there's like other things going on there.
I really like this arc. I don't have that many things to say about the writing, but honestly, like, the battles, chef's kiss, so good.
Let's talk about episode 21, the baseball episode. Guys, when I tell you that I could write a dissertation on the baseball episode.
Okay, for context, this is literally one episode. It's not even like the whole episode.
It's one episode.
It's literally
it's half an episode.
Half of the episode. And all the Kyoto students and all the Jujutsu High students are essentially playing baseball in adorable baseball uniforms.
Adorable.
And the justification for that, because Gojo wants to. And since Gojo is OP, he gets to do whatever he wants.
He's Gojo. Okay, no.
This is Gojo's world, and we're just living in it.
Can we talk about Mr. Akutami, if you are watching? He takes the tournament arc, a trope we know very well from shounen anime. And in most anime, it usually consists of, individual battles between students and or a group exercise that gets overrun by villains, right?
Yes.
And Akutami gives us the latter, and he's like, I know what you're expecting next. You're expecting 1v1 battles because that's what's expected of a shonen anime. But then he's like, actually, no. What if the teachers of Jujutsu High are so lazy that they literally just put ideas into a box and they just pull one out every year? The writing really flips the trope on its head. And it's like, I know what the people want, but actually, what if the students just played a game of baseball instead? It's also the mangaka being smart enough to realize that if you think about it, he's probably already explored everything he needs to explore about the characters. So what benefit is there really to having a 1v1 tournament arc right now?
I agree.
None. So we might as well just break the mold and do something completely different. And that works for a show like this because I think Akutami has a really good sense of comedic timing. He knows
pacing.
Yeah, he knows how to build comedy around the specific personalities of his characters. And I like that this episode at the end returns to the overarching point of tension, which is Yuji's existence as a vessel for Sukuna is a threat as long as he's alive. And we hear the conversation between the two principals discussing this conflict and reminding us that this is something we will have to reckon with later on, but not presenting it with a sense of foreboding, but with a sense of excitement. Like, there's a sense of hype that you get when you hear Principal Yaga talking, and he's just like, we don't know what the right thing to do is with this Yuji kid, so we might as well just go with the flow right now. It's like you're excited to see where the characters will go in their life. I think that's why it's a really well-crafted episode. Like, it's framed as a lighthearted gag, but actually it creates this very necessary breathing room to remind the audience of all of these overarching conflicts and themes of the show before stepping into the next mini arc of the season, while also being funny as hell.
That's a good point. I like that you call it like, what it does is give you breathing room, because now that I think about it, it wouldn't make much sense to have that tournament arc be disturbed by the villains and have such like terrible consequences for everybody and then go right back into 1v1 battles. Like, it just wouldn't make sense, especially considering the gravity of it all that had just happened. And so I think that, having a baseball episode, like, that's the only way that he could have gone. The writer could have gone to make this story special and break the mold, as you said, and make sense pacing wise. And Yeah, and as an audience, like, I needed it.
It was so funny. Okay, comedy highlights from the
Yeah.
baseball episode. First of all,
I'm so ready.
Number 1, Mekamaru showing
Oh
up
my god.
to the game as a pitching machine because
He, like, probably didn't even know he was in the game.
because his regular robot body got destroyed. I was on the floor.
Oh my god.
And then the way that they, like, flash these, like, fun facts about each character when it's their turn.
When it was Toto's turn and his was won middle school nationals with Itadori. Itadori denies this.
That was so good, man. That was so good. All of
I
them
love
were
that.
so funny.
I also want to say that aside from being hilarious, there are 2 notable moments that are important to the story. And the first one is the conversation between Kamo and Itadori about going back to the idea of why we save people and who do we save. And I think this was notable because this is the first time where we see Kyoto and the students of Kyoto starting to understand Yuji and where he's coming from. So that was the first notable moment. And the other moment, which I'm a big fan of, is when Shiguro punts the ball. And then we cut to a scene of Gojo, like, watching him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, when that happened, I was like, what? So I literally, like, rewatched it a few times.
To be like, what's
and
the
I
meaning?
was like, I couldn't figure it out. But then later we find out that it has implications for the story and for Shiguro's character development. And I was like, wow. Like, even in the most lighthearted and, like, throwaway episode,
he's still doing things.
he's still doing things.
So the last arc, episodes 22 to 24, we're back at it. We're doing some mystery investigation.
Mystery
Oh, right.
arc!
I am obsessed.
Mystery.
Oh my god.
Same.
No, I am obsessed with the way that this episode plays out. This episode starts again with a cold open, one of my absolute favorite things in any piece of storytelling. We see this opening shot of a man complaining to a landlord about how his door has been having issues auto-locking. And then it pans up and we see a cursed spirit hanging above him and presumably proceeding to kill him. I think it's just really good urban fantasy mystery storytelling. It starts as such a benign thing. Like, anyone can imagine how weird and creepy it is to come home to your door wide open. I love that this arc starts with such an ordinary real life thing and then having these mystery elements that are making use of that ordinary circumstance that we could encounter in our real world and then building a supernatural mystery around that. I was literally like, okay, Jujutsu Kaisen, you really just made this show just for me, didn't you? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I love the idea of the trio solving mysteries. Like, I just love it. It was clearly from the get-go set up to be a new mystery arc. They don't try to force the mystery arc to fit in with the rest of the season and the way that the other episodes were crafted beforehand. They kind of treat it as its own product. And I really like that because if you're going to write a mystery, you might as well go all in and write it well, right? Beginning to end. And so I love the idea of the trio being detectives. Just going back to our previous discussions about what good mystery entails, it's like one clue leads to another, and each clue escalates the stakes and escalates the story. We find out that the story is tied to Shiguro's past, because not only do we find ourselves back at his middle school, but we also find that his sister is involved.
Yeah, so episode 23 is... Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. This is where... Let me just hold on. This is where we finally see why the mangaka was holding out on Fushiguro's character. And I like, in hindsight, I like that we didn't explore this until later, but kept hinting at it because it gives us time to get to know Fushiguro in bits and pieces and create our own opinion of who he is before we kind of flip it on its head. Fushiguro starts fighting this special grade, the same one that we encountered
we're talking about this scene. Okay,
at the start of the season.
Let's go.
And then we get a glimpse of a training arc in a flashback. And it shows us that when Yuji returned much stronger, it actually pushed Fushiguro to swallow his pride and ask Gojo to train him.
Yeah, is this a rivalry incoming? I don't know, but we love a good rivalry.
Like you mentioned earlier, Gojo brings up the analogy of a bunt versus a home run, which calls back to the baseball episode. It's a really efficient way to explain Fushiguro's personality. Yuji is someone who would always go for a home run, whereas Fushiguro would settle for a bunt, whatever works, right? He points out that Fushiguro has always viewed his job as a sorcerer as like a team sport, and he's always unconsciously willing to settle. And Gojo has this line where he says, "Dying to win and risking your life to win are different things. Be greedier."
Banger line.
And this line of "be greedier," this is such a concise way to shed light on what is holding Fushiguro back and what separates him from Yuji, which is ambition. Like, it's not that he's not strong, but it's that if he wants to get stronger, he has to think bigger. And I think that this is such an amazing arc to give to a side character, because it's almost like bringing attention to the fact that Fushiguro sees himself as a side character. And that's an interesting trait to give to a character that's supposed to be the protagonist's rival, because usually with rival characters, they are rivals because their personalities clash or they have the same goal. But that's not really the case with these two. And what Gojo tells him in this flashback scene is essentially to be selfish and like be the protagonist of your own life. Like, that's how you become stronger. Going through these great lengths to make Fushiguro just seem like your textbook stoic character, like almost borderline boring, is interesting, because they kept teasing and teasing throughout the season all these moments where Fushiguro is like just on the cusp of using his full power, but he's always holding back. And finally, we're now seeing him unleash it. We finally see Fushiguro coming alive in this almost like manic way. Like, if you remember his facial expression when he like decides to use his full power, it's like he looks crazy, which is such a contrast to how we've seen him all season. That's why I think it was really smart that they brought back a villain that we've already seen, because it very clearly illustrates the difference between Fushiguro at the start of the season versus now. And it's
he
like
ran at the start of the season, and now he faces it.
I did not think we were going to get all of that in this season, and I thought it was really, really great.
I think I really, really loved this part of this arc. When Shiguro released his domain expansion, it felt so cathartic. This character is characterized in a way that he's always so uptight all the time, and he holds a lot of things back. And I think what you said about the character rivalry is true, in that he kind of does have everything that's required on his face to be like the perfect character foil for Yuji, because their personalities are very different. You just need the mindset, which is why the rivalry never felt like a true rivalry until this point. I mean, I feel like it still has to get started, but I feel like it's a common thing in shonen. Like, if you want to be extremely powerful, you have to tap into a part of you that is not something that is usually a part of you. So what I mean, for example, is Yuji, when he really demonstrates power in dire circumstances, he becomes very serious and more restrained than he usually is, because he's usually more laid back and casual. But it kind of has to be the opposite for Shiguro, because usually he is very uptight, but when he releases his domain expansion, I like the fact that he says, you know, it's not going to look pretty,
right,
but it's just literally raw power that he's unlishing. And he uses like shadows. Like, how dark and sinister of a
I know.
power
Can you
is
get
that,
any more
right?
emo?
Yeah, like, exactly. I like that he faces this special grade alone. There's always been this almost like distrust between Shiguro and the other first years that he's still trying to learn how to break out of. And he literally had just had this moment where he like essentially lied to the other two that he, you know, it's fine, like other people have taken over the mission, and he tries to take on the mission himself, but then the other two obviously like they're not going to let him do that, and they follow him and they tell him, you know, you don't have to tell us what's been bothering you, you just have to trust us. And so this is like the beginning of, I guess, Shiguro coming out of his shell towards the people who you would think he already trusts, but he just has so many trust issues that he hasn't gotten there yet. And so this is kind of him having that battle, that moment to himself, to tell himself, like, it's okay to unleash it. But, you know, it gives you hope that it makes you look forward to that day when he can unleash that power in front of other people and be a little bit more vulnerable and allow people into his life to see what he's truly capable of, because that's kind of like that's kind of been the entire reason he wasn't able to show his true power.
And then also, just the backstory that we get about Fushiguro's character as well, that contextualizes why he is the way that he is. Like, uptight, has trust issues, a very staunch believer in, like, good and bad people. Essentially, it kind of feels like Fushiguro hasn't had any control over some of the biggest aspects of his life. Like, he can't control his father selling him to this, like, gross family. He can't control even, like, becoming a jujutsu sorcerer. Like, that wasn't even his choice.
Getting cursed.
His sister getting cursed, and now he has, like, all of these things that he wants to tell her, all of these regrets that he has about how he treated her. The fact that all of that happens within the span of an episode is like really impressive, I think. Okay, shall we talk about episode 24?
I think this is hands down the most stylish fight in
I
the
was
entire show.
Obsessed with this episode. I agree.
Show.
I freaking love this episode.
I also want to say that I think Nobara's power is so cool.
It's so hot.
It's very but Nobara's power ability essentially is that as long as she grabs a piece of you and sticks it to her voodoo doll and she hammers down on the doll with like her nails, you get hurt. And so I think that kind of power requires so much intellect like in combat. And so when she realizes that the enemy has left a sort of imprint on her arm, she literally drives her own nails through her arm to cause damage to her enemies.
I know.
I just think that is so smart.
I was obsessed. I was so obsessed with that. Okay,
so.
The thing about her driving like the nails into her wrist, and she does it with this like crazy expression on her face. Other than the fact that that's very cool and very badass, it kind of recalls back to this comment that Momo makes during their fight about what scars mean on a woman's body.
That's right.
Momo like makes this whole thing about how, you know, scars are like seen as like a blemish on a woman's face, whereas for men it's like a, you know, something to be proud of.
Battle scar.
And the fact that, I mean, I don't know if this was intentional on Akutami's part, but I do think that the fact that we see Nobara without second thoughts ready to pierce her own body in this fight, I thought was like a really interesting point about her character, that she really does break the mold for a lot of expectations that people might have of her as a sorcerer, as a female character. And this solidifies her as being very capable, but also like on equal footing with Yuji. And I think this fight just shows like how strong she is. And I was just so in love with the respect and care that was put into her portrayal so far this season. And I think it was such a good display of character growth. The fact that Yuji and like Nobara and Fushiguro, the squad, they eliminate all of these special grade curses by themselves. Like, they're thriving. And it's such a contrast to how they were at the start of the season, where they barely got out of that first fight alive, and now they're here fighting 3 of them, and they're fine.
And just about the fight generally. I think that it is the right time to bring in human cursed spirit hybrids, because at this point it's like, all right, so you know that cursed spirits exist, you know that they're able to be special grade, and you know that there is a whole conflict about death, what that means, what it means to die properly, what it means to kill.
Yeah.
And now you're going to bring everything together and make it even more complicating by introducing human spirit curse hybrids. Because now it's like, how is Yuji going to face that, you know? How is Yuji going to come to terms with killing a cursed spirit who has a physical body, who once used to be human, or who still is? And so it raises the stakes for upcoming seasons, but it's even more like impactful that he fights this fight alongside Nobara. And again, you see the difference between their ideologies and how Nobara comes out of that being like, yeah, you just got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But Yuji's like really, he's like really like troubled, you know? And they have this conversation while walking through the forest.
I'm obsessed.
Under the moonlight. So much care was put into their interaction, and the pairing of these two characters together was very deliberate.
I really love the use of this creepy folktale as a backstory for the cursed brothers that Yuji and Nobara are fighting in this episode. I think, like you said, the episode goes to great lengths to show how, despite the fact that these curses like aren't humans, they have this sense of brotherly bond that is inherently a humanizing trait. And Yuji especially has to reckon with that humanizing trait and what it means to him that he murdered something capable of feeling emotion.
Yeah.
And okay, I really like what Nobara says in this scene where they're talking afterwards, where they're walking through the forest. She says, there are only so many seats open in my life, and I don't want to let my heart be swayed by anyone who's not sitting in one of them. I was really obsessed with this quote because I think it says a lot about Nobara as a person. Unlike Yuji, who is overbearingly kind and driven by this need to be a good person, Nobara recognizes that allowing yourself to care so much about everyone and everything in the world is mentally and emotionally difficult. I really like this conversation as well. Like it doesn't end on any specific thesis statement. Yeah. It's not cynical or hopeful. Like Yuji just says, you know, at the end of the day, I'm happy we're alive, but we still killed living beings. And Nobara's like, I guess we did. And it's like the show isn't trying to say what was right or wrong, but it's laying out like all the facets of what this fight means emotionally for these characters and showing us more about who Nobara is as a person while continuing to challenge Yuji.
I also like the ending, how they wrapped it up.
Oh, yeah.
So essentially, Fushiguro tells Nobara to not tell Yuji that essentially all of these things started happening because Yuji absorbed Sukuna's first finger. He knows Yuji well enough at this point to know that Yuji will take that to heart and potentially might start blaming himself. Yeah. And then we cut to a scene of Sukuna telling Yuji exactly that as he's walking down the hallway. Yeah. And it's like Yuji already knows these things, but he tells Sukuna to not tell Fushiguro. Yeah. And I was like, obsessed. Imagine knowing your characters so well that you can write something like this. Yeah. And it's like, what a great wrap up to your season.
I think the way that the show writes friendship is very good. The idea that Fushiguro and Nobara, who are not very like, they're quite cold as people on the surface, and the fact that this is a conversation between these two very cold characters, essentially about how they agree to not tell this to Yuji because they want to protect Yuji's feelings, was a very poignant moment, I think. And even though it's only a few lines of dialogue, it does a lot to show the extent of the main trio's friendship and how much they actually care about each other. And I think that the friendship is handled with a lot of care and nuance. Like, shonen anime tends to favor writing that focuses on extremes, like extreme rivalry, hatred, or on the other end of it, like preachy rants about friendship. But this show manages to create this sense that these characters really truly care about each other by showing versus telling. And just to go back to Fushiguro and Yuji as rivals, I say they're interesting because they don't follow the traditional rivalry tropes. They're not childhood friends with deep history. They're not two characters that hate each other and are directly fighting for the same goal. They really are just two people who shared some formative experiences together, and they respect each other and they care a lot about each other. And we can see that with the character writing without it ever feeling overwritten. Right. I don't think rivals have to hate each other. I think they can care about each other deeply while still being rivals. And I think it's that level of nuance that truly elevates this show from good to great.
It's just a very, and I believe you called the show meditative a lot. I think that this is like a very meditative ending because
it is.
It leaves you with our three main protagonists, everything that they've been through, and it just leaves you with all of these thoughts about their relationship, about the things that they're fighting against.
They're just best friends.
I think my favorite sketch.
What's your favorite sketch? I have a couple. I wrote them down. Let me see.
My favorite sketch, hands down, is when Yuji like runs up to Gojo and Nobara and he's like, guys, emergency! Shikuro is getting hit on.
That's one of my favorites as well.
And as soon as Yuji is like, Shikuro is getting hit on, Gojo is like, okay, execute plan, whatever. And then they like go and like act up in front of the girl.
This whole contingency plan for this one scenario. It's pretty comedic.
My gosh. And Gojo is like, I'm your violin teacher. Let's go for violin lesson.
Okay. So for the next segment on the pod, we are going to do the Bechdel test. This is a test that was devised by a cartoonist named Alison Bechdel, and it's a measure of female representation in any given piece of media. There are 3 simple questions. First, are there at least 2 named female characters? Do they speak to each other? And do they speak to each other about something other than a male love interest?
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, this show definitely passes.
I think they do. Yeah.
Yeah. The female characters in this show are some of my favorite female characters in anime in a really, really long time. I love how they are written.
I hope that more of the female characters get battle screen time in the future, because a lot of these characters are established as very cunning and very, very powerful, but a lot of the main showdowns don't involve them, or at least don't involve them on their own. And so I'm looking forward to seeing Nobara getting way more screen time and character development, hopefully her own arc.
Yes.
And also the power ranking system in this world, a lot of the women are not considered as powerful just because they don't have that kind of power, you know?
Yeah.
So I won't say that this show is perfect, but I think that compared to a lot of other shows, it stands at the top, definitely.
Yeah. I guess we can start with Nobara's character. I felt, at first, I was like, she's stock standard female shonen character, but by the time we hit that end of season fight, I really started to appreciate how she was written, how she was portrayed, and how her relationship with Yuji and Fushiguro is handled. I love that her femininity isn't erased from who she is or shown as a weakness. She definitely has flaws. Like, she's kind of a narcissist, But that has nothing to do with her being a girl. You know what I mean?
I agree.
I really appreciate the fact that she was given the archetype of being the abrasive, shouty character. Because, as the show makes a point of saying, girls are often held to this expectation wherein if they're not nice or pleasant, they aren't allowed to have flaws. So I just appreciate that Nobara shatters that expectation and is given the personality of just being kind of rude. I love her relationship with the boys, especially Yuji. Like, I think Nobara and Yuji have the grumpy ex ball of sunshine dynamic.
I love that.
And I love that it's a boy and a girl dynamic, and I love that Nobara is the grumpy one. I would like to see more development for her later. She has a personality, but she doesn't have an arc, and I would like to see her have an arc.
I love how they made her hot-headed and stubborn, not because of any particular reason, but only because that's just the way she is. Like, that's her personality, take it or leave it. And I feel like a lot of times that shouty character is delegated to the men. Like, a lot of the times, Exhibit A, I shall now show a picture of Bakugo on the screen. Yeah. She's also like a little socially inept too, because like she's from the countryside.
She's kind of dumb.
And on that note, I really like how much emphasis they put on shaping her character because she comes from the countryside. Because I think that even though, you know, they're all young and they're all students, there is a certain mindset that comes from growing up in the suburbs, growing up in the city. And they allow her backstory to really like influence her personality. I'm excited for her arc, as you said.
I would love for her to get an arc.
She needs her solo battle, and she needs her arc, and she needs her character development, and she needs her training arc. Sorry, I'm just giving her everything.
And she needs her own anime. Let's talk about Maki.
Who's next?
And Mai.
Yes. Maki and Mai.
Yes.
I thought it was very interesting, just like on a general level.
Yeah.
To write. I always think it's interesting writing twins because there's always that tension between, you know, the ways in which they're similar or the ways in which they're supposed to be similar, but they're in fact very different.
Right.
And I really like, although I feel like these twins could have gotten a little bit more writing and in-depth character analysis. I like their dynamic, and I like how they have one twin who is by all means more courageous, more headstrong, more ambitious, and the other one who, you know, likes to stay in her comfort zone and is okay with that, but has to almost put up a front because of pressure, family dynamics and family pressures. And so that conflict was never able to rise to the surface and have that cathartic moment, that revelation, until they actually battle it out, I believe in episode 17. When you have a past together as children and you grow up in very separate worlds and you have very separate ideologies, it's always complicated because you have that experience of being friends, you know, being innocent children together and growing up, and especially like being sisters. Like, there's so much weight that comes with sisterhood and what that means that, you know, I feel like could have been explored in so much more detail. They didn't, which is fine because we still had it. But yeah, I thought it was interesting.
I really love the idea that Maki has to overcome a system of power that's actively working against her. Like, not only as a sorcerer, but as a woman. Like, the idea of becoming number one and being the best and proving yourself to your family or the world, I feel like that's the kind of deep, compelling motivation and dramatic, like, character goal that's often given to male characters. So I just appreciated the attention that was put into crafting Maki's arc. She has such lofty goals of not even just being acknowledged, but dismantling the system and becoming head of her clan. Like,
and she has no powers.
We love a revolutionary. Do you have anything to say about Miwa?
Miwa?
Other than the fact that she's adorable?
Is so cute. Like, the way Miwa is like super uptight around her principal.
Yeah.
And she was like, excuse me, Gojo sensei, but you can't talk like that to him. And then inside she's like, oh my gosh, she's talking to Gojo sensei.
I love her. I would say that Miwa's arguably like one of the most relatable characters. Like she just seems like your everyday girl, you know? Oh my god,
like,
I know.
I love any scene that Miwa is a part
any
of.
scene that she's in.
Any scene. Miwa is best girl.
She is such a contrast from Nobara and Maki. Like,
Yeah.
and all the other girls actually. She's sort of like she is that good girl archetype. She's polite, she's cute, and I kind of love that because it leans away from that expectation that a quote-unquote good female character has to be super stoic and badass. I guess the last thing we can talk about is Momo versus Nobara, specifically the conversation that they have in episode 17.
Yes. So, in sum, they have this whole battle, which kind of does feel like a token feminism battle. But
I have a lot of feelings about this scene.
She says, even if they are strong, women have to be cute or they'll be undervalued. Of course, even if they're cute, they'll still be undervalued if they're not also strong. Do you get it? They don't demand strength from female jujutsu sorcerers. They demand perfection. I thought that was like a pretty banger line, I guess. I do think that there's, that there are points being made, as you say. And I thought it was also a nice contrast between Momo and between Nobara, because Momo is like the one who acknowledges the problems. Like, there are problems in the system. Here's what they are. Nobara is literally out here just like being herself.
She's like, and herself. I don't care.
Yeah, and she says to her in response, what makes us obligated to meet such perfection or such absurd demands? I'm Kugisaki Nobara. And I was like,
I have thoughts though.
Okay, why don't you go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not like rolling at my eyes at your points. I'm rolling my eyes at the dialogue because this was the only time. Again, this show is making points. It is making points that are often never even made in anime. But this was the only time in the season where I felt a theme was being overstated. And
it did feel a little token.
I think the theme is really poignant, like delving into the fact that women have to be perfect to be valued in the eyes of the current jujutsu system. Okay, I love that. But I just think they didn't need to have this conversation, because the reason that Momo is even bringing it up is because she's saying all this stuff about like, you're not being fair to Mai because she's a woman in this system and we're all just like women in this system and you're like not being fair to her. But it's like, why is Momo like bringing this up?
Matter?
Yeah, and why is she bringing it up to Nobara? It felt like the writer was waving his arms and being like, hey, I'm trying to say something. And obviously saying something is better than not saying anything at all. But
That's true.
But I'm not going to like give it an A+ just because you put it in there. Obviously, I like that Nobara does have that counter argument of like, I don't care and I'm just gonna live my life. But it felt really contrived. But
we still passes the Bechdel test.
But it still passes, and we love them, and all of them are best girls.
Our next segment is called Dumpster Fire. Dumpster Fire is a time where we could just lose our brain cells and talk about Satoru Gojo. I mean, anything we want.
Anything we want. What are you talking about? Who's Gojo? I would like to start with music.
Yes, please.
Okay. The way in which they curated the music for this show, from the OPs to the EDs to the background soundtrack, is amazing. I think the music makes the show feel really contemporary, really stylish, and like it's a way to breathe a sense of life into the characters in a really short amount of time. So Eve, the band Eve, gave us our banger OP1, Kai Kai Kitan. I think pop rock is a really great choice for shonen openings, in my opinion. Very safe choice, but it does a lot to generate hype. I think Eve is an amazing band. ED1, Lost in Paradise by Ali
I'm
featuring
obsessed with ED1.
ED1 has
obsessed.
transcended into a modern classic, I think. The way that it's shot as this fun little fashion show with this sort of doodle art style. Like, I saw the ending and I was like, this is so stylish that
You got me.
on principle, I have to watch this. I also want to talk about OP2 and ED2.
Okay. Yeah.
First of all, the fact that both of these are rotoscoped, I was obsessed. When I first saw OP2, I went absolutely feral because the animation was insane. When you rotoscope something, you rotoscope it because you want the animation to literally look like frame for frame like a real real life, you know? And okay, ED2
Yep.
shot as a cell phone video. ED2 should be in a museum.
As Yuji's cell phone.
As Yuji's, as a
compilation of the moments that he spends with the other students.
It's such a smart artistic choice because you watch this ending and it feels like you're truly watching like a group of teenagers just hanging out and taking Instagram stories of each other. And the song is like really beautiful. It's like a piano ballad, so it's kind of emotional. Breathtaking, spectacular, never before seen. I love it.
I just love like at the very end when it's like, you know, it's like typical. They're like calling Yuji over, and then we cut from like filmed shots to like Yuji holding the phone.
Do you want to talk about VAs?
I will talk about VAs. So, Geito's voice actor.
He did sound familiar.
Yeah. Sakurai Takahiro. And he also voices like Reagan from Mob Psycho 100. True. So it's like some of these actors
very different
have supporting roles, but they're actually huge. Another fun fact is Mahito's VA. I didn't catch his name, but Mahito's VA. Okay, do you remember our Your Name episode when we were saying that Taki's best friend is voiced by Kageyama's VA?
Yeah, how could I forget?
But Taki's other friend is voiced by Mahito's VA. Not only is Taki best friends with Kageyama, but he's also best friends with Mahito.
Love that.
Okay, now for the big dogs. Nobara, her VA, Seita Asami, voices one notable character, female character, from Bungo. And I want you to try guessing who that could be.
Higuchi?
Yes.
Okay.
She has that strong girl voice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Step on
Nobara,
me type voice.
Yeah. And then our last big dog, Satoru Gojo's VA, Nakamura Yuchi. He voices a character from Haikyuu, and I want you to guess who
Freaking
that
hell.
could be.
Oh my god. I'm forgetting his name.
It's Kuro.
Oh, yes. Oh my god. I know what he looks like.
Yeah, I know you got it in your head. I knew you got it.
I did. I forgot his name. Frick. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's been a
Gojo
while.
voices Kuro. And
Okay,
it's
that
like,
makes
of
sense.
course, you get all of like the freaking Bishonen characters. And the reason why I'm allowed to say that is because he also voices Ikuto from Shikochara.
That's... We've come full circle.
Gojo's voice is literally my first crush.
He's your first love. That's really great. You didn't look up the other VAs? I was just wondering if you would look up Nanami's VA.
Oh, that's it. No, I didn't. I'm not interested in that one.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not like. Did he even
didn't.
speak? No. I never heard
who's
Nanami speak.
I was quite aware of when Nanami's character showed up on screen.
Your eyes were open.
Yes.
It's a voice.
It's a good voice. Like,
it's the drawl. Anyways,
it's the drawl. It's the drawl.
I feel like this is the workshop bingo card. Like, it's the drawl.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. stupid.
Okay.
Except the bingo card is just draw. So if you get it, it's like, you got it. You got me.
So, okay, for the character designs, just the way that characters look, all I have to say about this is that anytime I see alt outfits in a contemporary shonen anime, I go rabid.
Stop.
I love when mangakas take the time to consider all facets of their characters' personalities and would think about, yeah, this is what a character would wear if they weren't in their school uniform.
I like when Gojo switches out his blindfold for glasses. Because it's like, there's... Chris closes her eyes.
The audacity of Gojo's character design. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Story time. I literally had not watched the show yet. And there was this one night that I had a dream and Gojo was in it. I don't want to talk anymore.
You're about to say something that is going to be edited out.
No.
I just think that Gojo in the open collar baby blue button down. Period.
My soul has left my body.
We've given Gojo too much power. He doesn't need more.
Yeah, he's too OP already.
Why'd they have to give him... Never
Why do
mind.
they have to make him so competent?
I'm mad.
Yeah. Like, is he rich? Sorry.
I hate it here.
Okay, anyways, what else? What else is there?
Our favorite
Just end
segment.
it here.
Our favorite segment,
Oh,
guessing each
yes.
other's favorite characters.
I have a point in my notes in episode 23.
Oh, no.
That literally says, OMG, Shiguro at his core is such a morally gray character. I wonder how Chris is doing right now. So,
Bye.
my first guess.
Thanks for joining this episode. We're done. Bye.
My first guess is Shiguro. Yeah, this one was too obvious.
Yeah,
Like,
this one was so
this one was
easy.
too easy.
Like, as soon as I saw him again, I was like, she's gonna know.
Let me go for number 2. Let
Yeah.
me get 2 for 2 now. Nobara. And for my last guess, I'm
Yeah.
gonna say Gojo.
I think all of them are very predictable
Yeah.
for me. Like, even if I was very stoic about everyone, I think you still would have guessed all 3.
Right.
Given my track record, like, I like the tsundere character the most usually. I like charismatic OP characters, as we know from Spike Spiegel. And I like hot girls. Okay, yours
So-
is gonna... I need to think about this. I just have a moment.
Explain your thinking. So
Okay,
that
I'm gonna
if
think
I
out
feel
loud.
like
I'm gonna
it's
think out loud.
appropriate, I can guide you.
Given your track record, I want to say that Yuji would be one of your favorites.
Right.
But would he be your top? You spoke at length about Gojo's neck. But is that enough of a character trait to dictate a fate? But then he's also Ikuto. But we know that voice actors don't play a role in your preferences. We know that from Tamaki Suo. I'm gonna guess that one of them is Miwa? Why?
You got it?
Wait, is that your top?
No, she's my like optimistic character.
Oh, okay, but one of them is Miwa.
And my side character. Yeah.
Oh
What the
my
hell?
god, okay.
How did you get that one?
Because if it's not Yuji,
Whoa.
then I felt like she was the
Right.
most optimistic character.
Yeah.
Because main cast isn't really optimistic, other than Yuji. Is one of them Gojo?
Yes, that's my top character.
Really?
Yeah.
Gojo's your top?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't underestimate my simpery.
I was surprised because during our Bungo episode, there's that joke that I made where I guessed that Dazai was your favorite character, and you were like, he's too OP. And then I was like, oh, so you don't like them OP.
Yeah, try guessing my third one. This one is like near and dear to my heart.
Wait, is it Junpei?
Yeah.
Oh my god, why would you do that to yourself?
I know. I love Junpei.
I love him too, though. I do love him a lot. They really... Anyways, you got mine so easily. If there's a shonen anime, I feel like I'm so predictable.
Yeah. Yuji is cute. Like, I love Yuji.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I actually feel like Yuji, because he's the protagonist, belongs in his own little bubble. Of course I like him.
I can't even think straight. What's the next segment? We are ratings.
Okay, I'm gonna rate this show. I'm gonna rate this show 4.5 out of 5. Gojo sunglasses.
What is it?
I'm sorry, that was really simpery of me to do that.
That's okay. I'm surprised you chose 4 out of 5. I thought you were gonna give it a perfect.
I think I need to see more of the show to really give it everything, you know? Because I do think that the show has a lot of personality. I think it has a lot of flair. And I am really invested in the characters. But I would like to see how it chooses to build out the rest of its world and all of those deeper pieces of lore. Because that's where I feel like I'll be really impressed. I already think it's amazing. I already think it's shonen excellence.
Yeah.
But I would like to see more because I think there's so many things that they're teasing. And it's one thing to set everything up, give a glimpse of all of these great ideas, but it's another thing to actually execute all of that. So 4.5, but it's a 5 in my heart.
I'm also gonna give it a 4.5.
Oh, okay.
Meatballs that Yuji taught Shiguro how to make.
Oh my god, I love that skit. Mm-hmm.
I thought at the beginning there were some parts where I felt like they were telling and not showing. There was a lot of exposition that had to be done just because it's a whole complicated world. But towards the end, I thought I was really, really endeared to the characters. Same. And I just really want to protect them. I really love their dynamic. So even though there's room for improvement and there will be future seasons, I'm kind of I feel confident that the show will deliver because it hasn't failed me just yet.
Yeah.
But the reason why I don't give it a perfect is because I do feel like the show tries to do a lot of things. And when you try to do so many things, and when you're that fast paced, there's always going to be points where you do have to, say it and not show because you just don't have the time for it or you just don't have the budget for it. And also, we were talking a lot about how the show leans into a lot of tropes and it doesn't subvert it all the time. I'm not saying a perfect show has to, but I am saying take the initiative to go above and beyond and try to break the mold because that is what is going to plant you in shonen history, I guess. I don't think Jujutsu Kaisen is going to be... I don't think it's a trailblazer in any particular aspect. I just think that it uses everything that's available to it as a genre and does it really, really well. But it's not like a Hero Aka where it subverts tropes and turns it into something hopeful and optimistic instead. And overall, I thought it was just an amazing anime visually, visually super engaging, and I really loved the show still.
Yeah, this is going to sound really controversial, but I actually see...
I'm ready.
This has nothing to do with the quality of BNHA. I think BNHA is amazing. I see the potential, based on my tastes and where the manga is going, that this show has the potential for me to like it even more than BNHA. I don't think that a show needs to break like tropes in order to be a 5 out of 5. Like just how the story feels is just as important to me than like what it's trying to say. And I do think that already the way that Akutami has like approached his themes and his writing is already like, I already genuinely think that he is doing something different in shonen. Yeah, like I don't want to give it a 5 yet because he's not finished speaking, you know? He still has the microphone in his hand.
That's true.
And I really in my heart, I want him to reach for that 5 out of 5.
Yeah.
I really hope that he doesn't choose to settle for like just the average shonen, and so far he hasn't.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode. Thank you so much for making it this far. We know it wasn't easy. Today was quite a long
Today
episode,
was not
a
easy.
long haul. But yeah, you could find us on Twitter. We're at Into the Workshop. You can also follow us on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. And we are looking forward to seeing you guys next time.